Now it's Tuesday and we always talk about relationships at this time of the week, and David Kavanagh joins me today to talk about something very interesting, because young women, particularly young women, can be negatively impacted later in life by growing up with an absent father, and we're going to discuss maybe how that can be turned around. David, does it matter if your dad is absent because your parents are divorced, or he's died, or maybe he's absent because he works away, or he's sick, or he's addicted, or whatever? Just, it doesn't really matter, whatever the reason. If your dad doesn't play a role in your life for whatever reason, there's an impact when you're older?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, we could go into the specifics of each type, but there's no need, because it's generally, it's the sense of, well, if my dad wasn't there for me as a child growing up into a teenager, what were the impacts on my development and stuff? So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Okay. And are the impacts big? So if you are a young woman, you're 25 years of age, your dad wasn't around when you were growing up for whatever reason, will you bring that in some way to your adult relationships with men?
More than likely you will, and probably more in ways that you haven't even realised yet. So maybe that's where the interesting piece could be for listeners today who are affected in this particular way. The kind of issues that we would come across in the therapy world would be things like self-esteem issues. Would be a major issue for women whose dads were absent, again, either through alcoholism or through workaholism, whatever it is. Just a general sense of not being good enough, compared to, say, a child who's had an interested and involved father. So children where dads have been very involved and interested tend to have a higher self-esteem and better social skills than children with absent fathers.
Okay, so the child becoming the woman will have a sense of inadequacy because possibly, their dad wasn't there. And what do they do then when they go into a relationship? They have low self-esteem, or do they look for somebody to replace what's missing, or how does this work?
Yeah, it can be a bit of both actually, but sometimes what happens is that usually the person has difficulty maintaining and building good relationships, so they will tend to push people away. They will tend to have superficial relationships, so it looks like so the man who's in a relationship with a woman can think he's getting very involved and it's moving on nicely, maybe it's going to lead to marriage, but then as he gets closer and closer to asking the question, will you marry me? And she's like, no, not at all. It was never on my radar whatsoever, because the idea of a commitment to a man is just too painful and too big an issue.
So the woman is holding some part of herself back from all of that kind of stuff. Are there things that you can do if you're somebody currently listening and kind of going, oh, I lost my dad when I was young for whatever reason, and actually my relationships aren't going swimmingly either? Are there things you can do to overcome this? Do you just need to get counselling around it, or are there things you can do to maybe, I suppose, unpick that fear of intimacy, or unpick that low self-esteem, or those types of feelings you might be having?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's first step is awareness. So becoming aware that you have been affected, probably in ways that in ways you haven't even realised yet. There's a lot of good books out there that will look at issues that women are kind of coping with from having absent dads. And I think just looking at how do you build up your self-esteem for anybody? It's about personal awareness, and it's also about kind of affirmations, telling yourself that you like yourself. Maybe with the help of a good therapist, might if you can afford it, it might be the route to take. But also taking chances in relationships. So just because you think you're going to get hurt doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to get hurt. So if you're in a relationship with somebody now, experience commitment and feel vulnerable and enjoy intimacy. I don't mean sex, but enjoy intimacy. It's not always as scary as you imagined it would be. So it doesn't. So
don't always be protecting yourself.
Yeah,
sometimes
give a little bit, trust a little bit. As much as you can do within reason, I think.
Does it also depend on your mum? So for example, your dad could be absent, but if you had a really good relationship with your mother and she was very supportive, she was very close to you. I mean, a lot of studies would suggest that one loving parent is enough. That if you have somebody in your life who's solid and there and reliable and dependable and bolstering you and all that against the world, that can I suppose make up for losses you might have. Maybe if you didn't have a dad but you have a great mum, does that make a difference?
It does make a difference. I mean, a loving mum who's considerate and compassionate and kind and supportive, and also in many cases where dads have been absent, women have had to take on the role of being a dad as well. So there's been this strict disciplinarian kind of authority figure that the mum has had to play that role too. So that's been very beneficial to many women who've grown up without absent dads, and I think women do an amazing job in that sense, because it's not easy.
So mums are breaching the gap in some way. What about in terms of there are lots of people who would suggest that having adversity when you're younger builds resilience in people. So even though maybe you're not as comfortable as you might be getting close to people, but you could say that about lots of people. Lots of people find intimacy a small bit uncomfortable. Can sometimes having that lack of a father make you resilient when you're older, because you've already suffered loss and that sort of experience when you were growing up, and now you're quite a strong person.
Well, that's it. I mean, we're all dealt a certain set of circumstances in life. It's up to each one of us to kind of do the most with what we have. And I think some women can be very determined and be very successful and be very driven to prove themselves in the workplace and in careers, because they haven't had a dad supporting them. So they're going to try even harder to kind of to push that glass ceiling, I guess. And that's really, really important. So, it's up to everybody to make the most of it.
It's a funny one, but can fathers be replaced? So supposing your father is gone for whatever reason, and your mum has a new partner, and they're very big and feature in your life in a supportive way. Mm-hmm. Does that fix the issue, or is it still the loss of the original parent that creates that sense of insecurity?
I think it's how men are represented to the woman is very important by the mum. So if there's a new partner, and the partner is supportive and kind and respectful, that's wonderful. That's an amazing opportunity for this young girl to discover herself and have a good relationship with men in the process. Having male role models is really important. So if you are raising children and there's no dad around, try and have those girls involved with men in a supportive, respectful, maybe in a sports context, as the case may be, where they're getting a bit of a push and a bit of a shove and a bit of a come on, you can do it now. We expect more from you. I think that sense of encouragement from strong male role models can be very, very useful.
Okay. Lots of people texting. Someone says, my son only sees his daughter once a week. I worry she will grow up feeling insecure because he's not there in her life, and anxious, and I can tell she's already been affected by it. So that's somebody talking about their granddaughter.
Sure.
And somebody else says, my girlfriend's mum died when she was very young. Is the absent mother a similar situation, or is there a different set of consequences? Is it the case that if you lose your mum, and your mum is very often the primary carer, is that as bad, or is that worse?
That can be worse, and that's a whole other conversation, I think.
Okay, all right. That's going to be very hard for anybody. I think anybody who loses their mum, it's an awful millstone, and very hard for them to go on and overcome it. Although, of course, people do, like they do all sorts of things that they overcome. Someone else says, Ciara, I'm a dad, and my dad was never there when I was growing up. In order not to be like my dad, I said that I'd never be like him, and looking back, I stayed in an abusive marriage trying not to be my dad. But I am a man, and I can't tell anyone that I was being abused, and now everyone thinks I'm like my dad because I left the family home. That's a very sad text, isn't it? That's somebody who really wanted to be there for their kids, and stayed in an abusive thing because of that, but ultimately did leave, and now feels that they're this. I think those perpetuating patterns of behaviour in generations are very hard, and the weird thing is you don't know whether that person, that dad's dad, left for similar reasons. You never
just don't know.
Never know. And Barry says, as a man without a father, I grew up with 5 sisters, and it affected me massively. So the loss of a dad is not just carried by young women, it's clearly carried by that's 2 male texters there saying that their dads being absent affected everything that they brought to bear in their lives.
And it's about the I suppose the discourse that we have about men as fathers, and men need to get really active. We're not just providers, we're not just here to provide economic support to people, but emotionally we have a huge impact on children, and the more time we spend with our kids as fathers, the more social skills, confidence, everything benefits.
Mary says, hi Ciara, I lost my dad when I was 13, and certainly the trajectory of my life was irrevocably changed for the worst. Having said that, I have gone on to build a meaningful and a happy life, and there is no doubt that the absence, or moreover the loss, of a beloved father figure has affected how I relate to men. But nonetheless, she's gone on and built a happy life, and fair play to Mary. Look, David, thank you very much for coming in and talking to us today. And